watching in the battle, yeah. Say what you want about me, yeah, but I'm a living in the green world, and I need the air to breathe. Some will say you gotta get your kicks by removing love from a natural trip. But metal will rust and money will burn, yeah. And on the final page I ask, were you living in the green world? And did you give some in return?
Awesome that everybody's here. We're going to walk up this trail and Zach is going to tell you a whole bunch about the history of this watershed. But Fish Creek is one of the areas that we're working really hard to elevate in with regards to the Palomar pipeline and the campaign that we're working on to try and stop this pipeline from happening. And one of the reasons why is because Fish Creek is a really special place in the history of bark. It's one of the first places that bark had our biggest success, and we'll talk some about what that was in the late 90s. And one of the people who was actually from the Forest Service who was actually really involved in that success, and one of the people who we're really connected with in the Forest Service had a lot to do with the restoration that was happening up here. And he recently passed away, and whenever I come up here I think about him, and I just wanted to share that this area has now become a really special place to bark, not just because it's a part of our history, but because it's a really important part of the Forest Service history too. And so I just wanted to share that because I have been spending the last 2 years trying to get as many people as I possibly can to come up and do this walk with me, and I've probably brought almost 100 people up here, and it is totally exciting to me that there are this many more people that are going to see it. And even if you just walk for half a mile, you're going to get it. It is the most special place in the Clackamas River, and I am just so excited that there's this many people here. So thanks a lot for all your patience getting here.
Brief piece of history is that back in the 90s, in the mid-90s, there was some massive flooding in the area. And due to a history of logging a lot of these slopes, a lot of slopes just kind of came down. There was heavy erosion. A lot of the roads were destroyed and wiped out. And the Forest Service didn't have the money available to actually replace the roads. And so, due to work with the Forest Service and through BARC as well, the decision was made to actually close the area and close off all these roads. And roads have a variety of effects on hydrology and soil quality that we're going to discuss as we go along here. But that's really one of the major points about is that this area is regenerating right now. There was a lot of logging, there was a lot of damage from erosion, and so it's a regenerating area, which makes it a really interesting ecosystem and a really interesting area to walk through. Some other things that we're going to be looking at while we're going through here are we're going to be looking at issues of habitat quality, such as there are a few stands of big old trees up here, which provide good habitat for things like spotted owl potentially peregrine falcon, that kind of thing. And so that's always an important thing to be considering too. And we're also going to be looking a lot, let me make sure I got everything here that I was going to talk about. We're also going to see a lot of evidence in the area here of OHV use, off-highway vehicles. There's a plan that the Forest Service is currently surveying and going over the comment period for to limit off-highway vehicle use in Mount Hood. And that plan will end permanently off-highway use anywhere outside designated areas. That said, currently this area already is supposed to be closed to OHV use, and as you'll see, there's quite a bit of that, and there's some associated damage that I'm going to be pointing out with that as well. So without any further ado, let's go for a hike.
Was it an illusion back when I was young, when everyone was living on a promise? In unity and dignity, together we were one, believing in the freedom of a dream. Once upon a great frontier, not so long ago, the hope of man and earth were so connected.
And I've taken this thing out 3 times. There's a pile that I leave every time I do it on the bottom down near the creek. And the ATVers come out and they rebuild it every weekend. And every time I put it, I try and pick it. And I call the Forest Service and I say, ATVers are coming out here, they're not supposed to be here. They're building illegal roads, and they say there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have the resources. And the last time I was on the phone, they said, why don't you go pick it? I said, you're telling me to go out and pick a road? Like, that's crazy. And they're like, we don't have any resources to do it. If you don't want it there, go take it out.
So you're saying that it's okay to take this out then?
Well, it's not okay to build it, and I'm worried about taking it out because the rock will go right into the creek, and this creek really needs to restore itself and does not need additional sediment in it, or gas that's been left on the road, so it's very frustrating.
This beautiful creation here to help us grow is watching as it slowly slips away.
Hey Amy, this cut bank wasn't here last.
Look at this. This is all going right down into the creek, too.
This wasn't here 3-4 months ago. What, has there been a landslide? What caused this?
ATVers. They make it so that the slope stability is so bad that nothing can stay on it, and then they come in with these rocks that are from outside of the area that probably haven't been washed and are covered in gasoline, and build these roads, and then it goes right into a creek, which is getting all this money to be restored right now, and it's totally going to waste every time these guys mess with it.
On this carousel of madness, on a horse to kingdom come, I see our dreams just melting in the sun. Won't you take me back to Eden, to a time when we were one, before the separation had begun?
What do folks know so far about the trail? Used to be a road, yeah. Like I said before, the road was all torn out in the late 90s, due in large part to the problems associated with logging this area and erosion. And I stopped here to mention that because if you look up the slope here, you can see a lot of this, of why this region of the National Forest is such a critical one to not have the roads reopened on. And why logging this area was such a bad idea is because you have these steep, steep slopes with tons of erosion coming down, and these ones even, are forested still across the river here. One of the factors that's going to be a major issue with putting the Palomar pipeline in, if they so choose to do that, will be that they're going to be creating a up to 300-foot wide clear cut for the initial cut along the entire length of the pipeline route. So part of that will be allowed to revegetate, but throughout most of the National Forest portion of the pipeline route, it's been designated as essentially a special area that requires a wider cut. And so having a 300-foot clear cut coming down a slope like this is going to cause drastic destabilization of this entire slope. And so these sorts of erosion concerns are one of the major things to be watching for as we're coming through here. Another thing to have noticed, as we were all walking along that first stretch there, does anybody remember what the upslope side of the trail looked like? How a lot of it was crumbling down and, yep, pretty steep. And a lot of that is a result, a lot of that erosion is a result of the roads that were put in before. When they built the forest road, they in-cut into the slope and then used that debris to build out so they can have a stable, flat-ish road, correct? As a result, that slope becomes even steeper and loses all of its stabilization. And so what you're dealing with then is a situation where not only are you removing the trees and the roots that are all holding that slope in place, but you're also cutting into it and making it steeper and removing a lot of that topsoil. So keep an eye out for that as we're walking along here as well. A little bit of history about the Palomar pipeline. So what it is it's a pipeline that connects the Bradwood Landing Terminal with a network of pipeline grids that are extend up into Canada, Washington, down to California. And really a big issue is that they want to increase natural gas capacity for Oregon. And something to keep in mind is that the Oregon Department of Energy itself released a statement saying that Oregon doesn't need the amount of capacity that the Palomar pipeline would bring in for at least, another 80 years, if not longer. In 80 years' time, I hope to no longer be using natural gas to heat my home, personally. I'm not sure of anybody else, but that's kind of a definite goal for me. And so building this is building out capacity for something that we're trying to be off of before we'll even need that sort of capacity. The pipeline itself also is going to be going through a lot of private land as well as public lands of the National Forest. So there have been some issues with working with ownership rights as well along the pipeline route. But we're not going to really get into that here today because that's not really the issue at hand in the National Forest.
If you talk to a lot of people in the Southwest right now, we don't realize it up here, but water is a huge deal for them. And we kind of tend to take it for granted. And how we manage our watersheds is, by letting all this dirt flow into the streams, killing the habitat for the fish. It's a crime for a lot of people who are just really trying to stretch every single drop right now.
And that's not to say our climate couldn't change and force us to have to evaluate it at a more thorough level too.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So we abuse watersheds like this. What are we doing?
We're going to be talking about watersheds a little bit later on too. We talk about some more of the road effects on water quality. The hike today is going to end at a bridge. Well, our furthest point is going to be out at a bridge, which would be a great place to take a look at and talk about water quality issues, including siltation as well as herbicide application to maintain that corridor that we're going to be walking through. That's going to be put in for the pipeline rather. Without any further ado, let's keep this hike moving here. So the reason I stopped here is we've been talking a lot about OHVs and OHV conflicts in the National Forest. And one big issue is user-created trails. OHVs would cause a lot less damage if there wasn't a distinct tendency amongst the user base to create their own trails and to go off trail, and a feeling of entitlement to go off trail and create their own trails. And it's something that's been actually reported by OHV users in their own surveys of how they use trails. So I stopped here because this is an instance that I find to be relatively more horrific for me. Because someone has decided that it'd be a really fun trail to drive down here, and they actually go right through the water there. We're talking about water issues here of soil compaction along going down into the water. We're talking about increased erosion as, you know, vegetation is stripped away from people coming down here. We're talking about contaminants entering the water stream at that stage. And so this is a really good example of why OHVs are a problem in the National Forest, is that they do have this tendency towards, OHVs have a tendency towards doing things maybe not always like this bad, but they do this. This happens, and it's not a rare occurrence for something like this to happen. This happens on a regular basis. One of the other areas that the pipeline is going to be passing through is already designated as a OHV area. It's called the McCubbin's Gulch area. That's on the drier side of the National Forest, and there have been conflicts there already with people not staying on trail. And if you put a clear cut through that area, it's going to provide a lot of temptation for people to start driving their OHVs along that clear cut, which will prevent it from revegetating as much as they're even going to allow it to. The plan that they proposed, and we're waiting to hear back on what the result is on it, was that there recently was a forest plan revision to limit OHV use to certain specific areas. And Bartlett did a lot of hikes and did a lot of ground truthing around that. It's going to be a lot of, it's going to rely on a lot of other users reporting when they see abuse, and when they actually see instances of somebody abusing the National Forest and breaking these laws, having an OHV in the wrong area.
Particularly in this area, especially because it's so remote.
Yeah.
The terrain is so rough and it's so remote that it's hard to get anybody in here to really enforce anything. I was saying in the car ride down that this is essentially lawless territory down here.
Essentially it is.
Other than at Bagby Hot Springs, occasionally they'll have somebody go out there and patrol, but that's it.
We need more honor, Principal.
Some more honor in our society would not go amiss, I think. You're right. While we're here talking about water briefly, so we probably won't make it out to the bridge, I'm also going to mention that one of the other major impacts of not only opening up these roads here, because to put the Palomar pipeline in where they want to put it into this area, this road itself will definitely be reopened. And one of the big issues with roads is there's issues of soil compaction as well as runoff issues. So I think Jake mentioned earlier in his question about soil quality issues, it's not soil, but water quality issues of siltation from erosion and its effect on fish populations. Salmonids like, you know, coho or even trout are salmonid. Require certain types of beds and certain types of pools to actually spawn. They spawn in naturally created pools that have gravel bases on them, and they dig out essentially with their bodies a little pool and they spawn there, a little pit in the dirt. And so what happens is when there's lots of roads in the area and lots of erosion, lots of siltation, it fills those pools in, so it makes them a lot less. It actively decreases the success rate of salmon spawnings. There's a couple reports that I've read that actually directly relate road density to fish spawning success. And there's a very direct correlation between spawning success, spawning numbers decreasing with increasing road density. So opening up these roads would be a major issue for that.
This trail that we've been walking along that you can see over here was once a paved road, like the one we drove in on, the continuation of that, going all the way up along Fish Creek. And in 96 to 98, there was a series of really extreme floods here that caused, 260 landslides in this watershed alone. So giant pieces of the road washed out and into the creek, which is not very good for it. Fish Creek is also pretty special because it's really good habitat for threatened steelhead trout and for salmon spawning. And so the Forest Service made Fish Creek their special restoration project. And they brought in tractors in here and they tore out the entire road, and they felled logs and put them in the creek to try to create some sense of natural stream restoration by creating, man-made log jams to provide more fish habitat. So we'll see some of those as we walk down by the creek later. And you can see here how the flood and erosion has dramatically resculpted this landscape in an instant. We're glad that we weren't the ones walking here when it fell out.
A lot of the times when you're on a road, you sort of think of it as just this clear cut through the forest, but it's not that wide, so it's not really having that big of an impact. But I love this place because you can really get an appreciation for what it takes to build a road in a forest. You're not just talking about clearing a path, you're talking about building up a major pile of dirt. So here you can see, actually it's kind of better from the other side, but you can appreciate that there was this original slope that went down like this. And the way a road is built is, the cheapest way to build it is to cut out of the slope and then take the fill that you're cutting out and build out from the slope, so that you don't actually have to bring any material in or take it out. That's the kind of cheapest, easiest way. So most roads in Mount Hood are built that way because in the 1950s and 60s they were logging so fast that they just wanted to build these roads super cheap and really fast. And the result of that is that, for one, you have an unnatural cutoff in the slope, and then you have basically this extra stuff like hanging off the slope. So in terms of an area that has one of the highest designations of landslide potential, that's not a very smart way to build a road. You're obviously going to have stuff start to move off of that slope. And so when you are driving along a road and you see kind of a road sagging, or you see cracks in it, and it's usually on the downslope side of it, that's what's happening, is that part that they built off of the slope is starting to be compromised and fall down the slope. And that has all sorts of other implications for sediment load falling down the slope and going into whatever creek or river is below it. And I just love this because when they did the road ripping, they took all the surface off, and they removed the culverts that were being used to allow for water passage underneath the road. But they determined that this main road, 54, and it was over 120 miles of road that they actually took out, but this was the main road. And when they were going about taking it out, they determined that actually removing that fill was going to have such an impact on Fish Creek because of the sediment that could possibly be put down slope, that it was better for the forest to basically reestablish itself and kind of work that slope back out itself and not try and move it around with a bunch of machinery, which is often the case. A lot of the times they end up leaving that fill because the short-term impact would be so great. And one of the things that's really great is you can also see in this area, there's a lot of these alders. Right here is one, these little ones, you can see them more over there. We're going to see a lot of them as we go. Alders are really awesome trees for restoration projects because they have nitrogen fixers in their roots, and so they actually love growing in disturbed areas, and along an old road is often where you'll see the most red alder, and they actually are having a restorative effect on the soil as it's kind of repairing itself from disturbance of a road being here. And there's all sorts of things as we walk of indicators of the fact that this watershed is actually a really great example of a watershed kind of mending itself.
And the main thing to keep in mind today as we walk is that if this pipeline project is approved, if this LNG pipeline is approved, this road, which is returning back to the land, is going to be rebuilt and repaved so that they can get equipment in to make the crossing of Fish Creek 3 miles out here. So you can just get a sense of what the land looks like now and imagine what it once looked like, you know, just 10 years ago before this restoration began, and then see all that undone.
Wouldn't they have to also get access to the other side? Build a road in there?
There's a bunch of roads that they would use at the top of this this slope over here, and I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. They may need to build more roads over there. I'm not actually sure. They haven't actually released the maps of where they'll be building the roads, but they have released resource reports saying that they will be rebuilding this road.
And this is going to be an asphalt road, not a gravel.
They have said that they'll keep it native surface, like they'll use dirt, but the fact is, I mean, as we saw when we were walking in, ATVs are trying to use this area, and it's actually, but you're not supposed to, this trail is not supposed to exist, and we're going to use it because it's nice that it's here and we can actually see it, but technically this isn't a designated trail. The Forest Service tried to basically put a closure on this area for a long time so that they could basically let it heal, essentially. I mean, they didn't want to have any management in here. They wanted to have it just take care of itself. And ATVs, before this happened last summer, this sort of more extreme slope stuff, but before you could actually get an ATV up over onto the other side, and at the beginning of the summer they lost access to it, and so for a while this trail was starting to grow back in on the other side, and it doesn't look like this, what we just walked into. This is one of the few places where there really are not roads. Yeah, and there are still some of these road beds, but as opposed to the fact that there's thousands of miles of, like literally maybe 1,000 miles of road that are not on the map but actually exist. They really did actively take out the roads, obliterate the roads in this watershed.
Is it because it's so rugged here that they couldn't get roads in, or was it just to log it? Or?
No, there was huge road system in here, and they logged the snot out of it in the 50s and 60s. But when this happened, these floods happened, they used the emergency funding to actually go in and actively rip the roads out. And that was one of the first things that BARC actually worked on, and our founder, one of our founders, John Rancher, was really active in getting that emergency funding put towards road removal rather than rebuilding the roads, which was one of the options. Was, you know, all these roads were blowing out, well, let's just rebuild them. And they were basically, there's a lot of fish biologists that were involved and said, you're crazy, that, like, if we keep rebuilding them, they're just going to keep falling back in the creek, and the fish stock was way down, and they were like, we have to take advantage of this moment with all this money and get these roads out of here. And if you talk to any of the fish biologists on Mount Hood, they really talk about this, like this was the best decision that they made.
And there's a video on the Forest Service website that Amy showed me, which is really quite interesting. They're so proud of this restoration project, and the video uses all this language like, those in power are suspicious of restoration projects, you know. And, it's kind of like they consider themselves like going against the grain and these rogue restoration experts by taking out the roads in this area, and so this threatens to undo all of that work.
Is there a link on the BARC site to that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wanted to restate kind of an overview of BARC because we're approaching this hike in a kind of non-linear way. And when I first got involved with BARC, the main thing they did was monitor timber sales, and BARC still does this. There's publicly subsidized timber sales all over Mount Hood National Forest and all over every national forest, particularly in the west, but also in the east. And it's your tax dollars supporting the industry and land managers deciding what gets thinned, what gets cut. So BARC got involved as a way to try to stop commercial logging on Mount Hood, and has been super effective in stopping a lot of timber sales, and also reducing the amount of old growth that gets cut. And BARC does that in several ways. One is by organizing citizen volunteers like yourselves and myself to go out and take a look at what's on the ground and say, look, we're taxpayers, we're entitled to have a say in the management of the forest, so I want to know what's going on. And shockingly, you can be an amateur, forester, silviculturalist, and find a lot of ways that the Forest Service is breaking the law. And citizens are armed with the National Environmental Protection Act, Policy Act, thank you, NEPA, which allows, which says that the public gets a chance to have a say in land management. And so every project, whether it's coming from the Forest Service or another agency like the BLM, or in the case of the pipeline, an agency called FERC, which I'll talk about, has to go through stages where they do environmental impact studies, and we get a chance to write comments about that, and then appeal that. And if there's a basis in court, then BARC will partner with a law group and actually file suit, and in a lot of cases win to stop the sale. And then lately what's happening is BARC has been diversifying to fight these other attacks on Mount Hood National Forest, which are not coming directly from timber interests, but happen to involve timber interests as well. And the Palomar pipeline is one of several natural gas development projects that are happening, that have all come up in the last 3 or 4 years in the Northwest and across the West Coast. Well, across the nation, really. But the ones here in Oregon are a series of natural gas receiving terminals that are proposed on the coast. 2 of them are near Astoria. One's called Bradwood Landing, one's called Oregon LNG, and one of them is down in Coos Bay. And the difference between natural gas and LNG is liquefied natural gas, and that's natural gas that is super cooled so that it becomes a liquid form. So this is mostly methane and some other trace gases cooled down into a liquid form so that it becomes exportable, and you can put it on a giant ship that looks like a floating bra and sail it across the sea from a place such as Russia or Iran or Indonesia and sell it to the US. That ship will dock at one of these receiving terminals on the coast, where the liquefied natural gas will be regassified, which is a fancy scientific term, and then it's ready to put into a gas pipeline to go across the country to Mel Gibson's house and to your house. So Northwest Natural is the gas company that we're mostly familiar with, living in this area, and their slice of this LNG pie is the Palomar pipeline. And they've partnered with another company called TransCanada to create a company called Palomar. And the Palomar pipeline would connect an existing TransCanada pipeline on the east side of the mountain over to the coast to Bradwood Landing, which is the one at the on the Columbia River. So BARC has been fighting this pipeline since its inception, and they've gone through 3 stages of comment writing now, and what we're waiting for is the final environmental impact statement, which will be our chance to really jump in with a lot of comments. Do you want to correct me on that?
Yeah, sorry, we're still at the first stage.
The draft?
Yeah, the first stage is scoping, so we're still in scoping, and we're waiting for the draft environmental impact statement, so it wouldn't be the final one. Just, sorry.
The draft environmental impact statement. Thanks.
And then we'll have a comment period. So it's the second part of the, yeah.
But this is a really important comment period, right?
Yeah.
And this issue has been really interesting for me to see because it's unified a lot of really diverse groups in terms of private landowners who don't want this pipeline crossing their land, private foresters who don't want to lose a giant swath of trees to it, people with vineyards, people with farms, people in Astoria who are going to be near the receiving facility who are afraid of it blowing up and are unsure about the public safety risk. The fishermen who fish at the mouth of the Columbia are not into the idea of, 45 acres of habitat being dredged to make room for this facility. It's going to have an impact on fish population both down there and up here at Fish Creek. And then of course environmental groups like BARC who don't want to see a highway width clear cut going across the entirety of Mount Hood. It's a 270 acre pretty much permanent clear cut. So one of the awesome things that BARC did, which was Amy's idea, was this project called Orange Alert / Hike the Pipe. Two projects, I guess, rolled into one. Amy and several volunteers, including myself, were part of it, hiked the entire Mount Hood section of the proposed pipeline corridor as soon as it was staked out. Because one of the main problems is that the company has not been cooperating by providing adequate maps for citizen oversight, and that's going to come back to hurt them. So what was that, the summer before last? You went out and hiked the whole length of the pipeline and took along a swath of orange fabric to show to express the width of this proposed corridor and what would be lost. And there's links to those images on the BARC website. I find them really arresting.
Well, I think that, we looked at the map before we left, and it just was really helpful on that hike to realize how many areas it goes through that are pretty important to people, including, so Fish Creek is a place that's really close to me, and I feel really connected to this watershed, but the Clackamas River crossing, it goes across a trail that we've brought a lot of people out to, and many people hike that trail, so you would see it as you're hiking. It goes up towards Timothy Lake, where a lot of people know of going fishing and going up camping up there. It goes across the Pacific Crest Trail, so again, you'd be on this beautiful trail and you'd come across this huge corridor. And a lot of people have asked, well, how is it even possible for that, for them to be able to build this? Aren't there environmental laws that they would have to, that would be in the way? And in fact, there are. And you would think that they would be strong enough and there'd be enough public support that it would stop a project like this. But in fact, the problem with the energy companies is they've sort of been getting this free pass lately to try and expand new development as a way to bridge towards renewable energy, that things, the Palomar has actually started moving forward on getting some of these laws changed. So it wouldn't change the laws everywhere, but along the path of that pipeline, they would change the laws. So things like Wild and Scenic River laws would be changed. Late successional reserves, which is a type of standard and guideline in this area that it makes it so that you can't clear cut in the old growth forest anymore. Those laws would be changed. And in fact, in this area, because of the high designation for earth flow, they're not supposed to be clear cutting out here either. Well, that designation would just be lifted, and on the path of the corridor, they would just like pretend like that designation doesn't even exist. They would lift it off. And so I guess that as we were hiking, one of the volunteers who went with us kept making this point that was really like shocking to me. If this was a logging project, there's no way they could do it. They would not. There's laws that would prevent that from ever happening. But because it's an energy company, the Forest Service is like, okay, yeah, we'll change those rules, no problem. And it's like that you know, those industries, we do a lot against both those industries, but it was interesting to me to think about, you know, there's a lot of talk about how there's not enough logging happening anymore and all these logging jobs are going away and what can we do and how can we make it better. Nobody ever talks about like changing the environmental laws for the loggers to try and promote, you know, logging jobs. But energy company comes in, no problem. Yeah, we can get rid of those laws.
But the Forest Service wouldn't feel that way with the energy companies because it's a new situation, or because they assume that they're too big and powerful that they wouldn't be able to hold them to certain standards, or
I think it's
why?
both. I think you just gave both reasons. I mean, I don't know exactly, but when we've talked to the Forest Service, there's a lot of people within the Mount Hood National Forest that do not want to see this pipeline built. And they're not openly vocal about it, but they say it. They come to the meetings and they bring up their concerns. So I don't know exactly why they couldn't just say no, except that there is a ton of political pressure. Earl Blumenauer's wife is on the board of Northwest Natural. That's just one example of like some of the political pressure that, you know, Blumenauer is one of our champions. He is one of the reasons we have new wilderness areas, and yet we can't go to him asking for help with this because he's got a conflict or whatever. And I don't mean to, it's hard to out somebody who I actually have a lot of appreciation for, but that's just one example of the many political pressures that are making it so that we don't have those politicians standing up and saying, if the Forest Service can't do this, we're going to make sure it happens. And Ron Wyden, our senator, has stepped out, and he actually wrote a very strong letter last winter saying, I'm not okay with these laws getting changed for a pipeline. He didn't really lay out what he was gonna do about it, but we're gonna hold his feet up when we come around to the EIS. We'll make sure to hold him accountable to some of the things he said and try and get another comment from him.
What about the citizen momentum that was built over so many years in opposition to PGE and Enron? Why can't that be transferred to a parallel or somewhat similar realm type project where the taxpayers and the citizenry are getting totally bulldozed by massive energy corporation?
I think that there's a lot of effort to try and tap into that. I mean, I don't have an easy answer for you on that because I think there was a big momentum, and I don't know. I think there's a lot to do maybe after 8 years of Bush, that maybe it's hard for people to feel like they can be re-empowered, and it might take a while to kind of build back after that. I don't know. Northwest Natural has a pretty green thing going on. I mean, their greenwashing and marketing is pretty successful. People really do think like this is a good green local company, and in fact they're the ones driving this major project. So I don't know what the easy answer to that would be, but it's interesting you bring up PGE because I can't remember who I was telling this to, but a couple weeks ago we got called by PGE and asked to come in and look at some maps of a proposed Cascade crossing, which getting across the Cascades is like energy companies' kind of biggest challenge because there's so much public land and so many environmental laws basically keeping things like corridors from going across the Cascade, and yet we have this growing population and lots of sources on the other side of the Cascades. You've got Colorado gas, you've got renewables building up, wind farms. So this idea that there should be more transmission lines is really desirable. And we went into this meeting with PGE, and of course, what was on the map was, the Palomar route. And I said, well, that doesn't exist, because what they were saying is we want to expand existing corridors to put new transmission lines in. And I said, but that one doesn't exist. And they said, well, you know, it will. And I said, well, no, it won't, and you should take it off because it's going to go down in a ball of fire, and if you want to go down with it, then you can leave it on, but otherwise you should probably take it off of that map.
LNG is being greenwashed as this renewable energy source, or like it's somehow not fossil fuels, or it's somehow green. And when you look at the statistics on global warming, once you import LNG from a place like Indonesia or Iran or somewhere with really shady environmental laws, really shady or non-existent labor laws, once you condense that gas, put it on a ship, sail it across the ocean, regassify it, and pipe it somewhere, it actually has a carbon footprint, on par with coal. So whereas domestic natural gas is, it's a cleaner burning solution, coming from Colorado or something, LNG is not the same animal. And so when Northwest Natural presents that green facade, it's totally false, and they're being targeted by a exciting capital campaign right now, marketing campaign rather, to target them for those practices.
I'm a lover, not a hater. I'm a lover, not a hater. Can't you see? Can't you see in my eyes? They're at peace. There's no war to be had. There's no war to be had from me. I'm a lover, not a hater. I'm a lover, not a hater. Can't you see? Can't you see in my eyes? They're at peace. There's no war to be had. There's no war to be had from me.
Offering some ways that people can stay involved in what happens to this place and to the Palomar pipeline project, as well as briefly again mention the other threats that accompany this project. I mean, of course, installing the pipeline itself is going to require a massive clear cut across the entire width of the Mount Hood National Forest, not to mention the private lands between here and the coast. And several creek crossings and river crossings to really sensitive wetland areas. And you can also see, as we've been walking along here, how off-road vehicles gain access through any industrial project that happens in the forest. Anytime they reopen an old logging road, it becomes astronomically more difficult to close it again, because some OHV users will use that as an access point to have a new playground. So that's a threat that we're facing in this area. It's really hard to keep them out.
Mo.
So what's going to happen with the Palomar project is that the draft environmental impact statement will come out, and there'll be a comment period that everybody should get involved in. And we'll also be urging representatives for the city of Portland, for the state of Oregon, federal representatives to come out against the project. So everyone's going to need your letters, and BARC will be the BARC website will be a great resource to find out, when that happens and how to respond to it. You can also write letters to FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. and it's a commission of old guys who sit around and decide whether the energy projects are appropriate environmental impact or not. And I think they've approved 100% of all LNG related projects historically.
LNG, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we kind of know what FERC's going to do. So this project's a little different than dealing only with the Forest Service, which is, you know, often the case with a timber sale. But FERC needs to hear your opinions. And then I always encourage people to talk about your experience with a specific place. So say I hiked along Fish Creek. Say, you know, I saw how much work, how many hours and thousands of dollars the Forest Service put into trying to rehabilitate this area, and I don't want to see it lost because they want to put a pipeline down the road. And then also target your politicians who are taking political contributions from the energy companies. They need to hear that you don't want to stand for that, and that, you know, because you voted them into office, you expect them to represent you in saying no to this project.
Bark and joined with Columbia Riverkeeper and Sierra Club this past week and launched a campaign specifically targeting Northwest Natural because of their involvement with the Palomar pipeline. And we launched a website which is heynorthwestnatural.org. And the idea is to say, you know, hey, Northwest Natural, we don't support you being involved with Palomar. So the website is hey, H-E-Y, hey. northwestnwnatural.org. And there's a bunch of information about exactly how Northwest Natural has been involved, what we're asking for them to do in terms of getting out of the Palomar pipeline, and things that you can do to get involved in that campaign specifically. And it's going to be really exciting. The goal is to get them to divest out of Palomar by their shareholders meeting in May. And if they don't, then they're going to have a really rowdy shareholders meeting. So I really encourage people to kind of check that website out and keep updated with it, because it'll be a pretty exciting campaign and hopefully bring out new people. The farmers and fishermen and affected landowners have been fighting this fight for several years now, and I think that it's time to get a critical mass to help them, because they're tired and scared that they're going to lose their land pretty soon if people don't step up and do something. So.
For the last year, it's not exactly a campaign. In fact, I thought of this myself, but then I talked to other people who are doing it also. But if you get a gas bill from Northwest Natural, which an awful lot of us do, a really easy way to send them a message is on the front of your bill, you check the box that says more information, you know, see back for change of address for other information. And then I usually just take a red Sharpie and write no LNG.
Oh, that's great.
But if you want to get, if you have more energy to just get, you know, you could write anything. And probably the person that sees it is just someone who has a shitty job working for Northwest Natural, but, you know, I don't know if there's a campaign about this.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is one of those easy actions that, you know, a lot of people can't do. And I don't know, who knows how they'll get back to, you know, executives or whatever, but I think if we say that people are doing it, they're going to look into it and see if people are, because they're going to listen to their customers. We know that, and so.
Do they have a feedback email on their website?
I think they do.
You'd think they would. They would have to see that.
You can report if something smells bad.
Oh, watching in the battle, yeah. Say what you want about me, yeah, but I'm a living in the green world, and I need the air to breathe. Some will say you gotta get your kick